start recording and move back to the mission statement. First, Helping Parents Heal is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents to become shining light parents by providing support and resources to aid in the healing process. We go a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and evidence for the afterlife in a non-dogmatic way. Affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and allow for open dialogue. Attendance today at the Helping Parents Heal meeting is voluntary, and we are here for the benefit of learning from and sharing with other parents whose child has passed away. It is understood that our discussions are intended to be confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers to allow parents to be informed about many possible ways to heal, to connect with their children, and to learn about the afterlife. The views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of Helping Parents Heal, and we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. So I'm going to go ahead and admit a bunch more people, and then I'll go back and read Jeffrey's bio. Let's go ahead and let a few more people in. Jeffery Olsen is a best-selling author who inspires audiences internationally with his intriguing story of perseverance and inner strength. After a horrific automobile accident took the lives of his wife and youngest son, also inflicting multiple life-threatening injuries to Jeff, including the amputation of his left leg, he found the courage to survive over 18 surgeries to eventually heal both physically and emotionally, to thrive in his career and community contributions. Jeff has appeared on many national and international television and radio programs sharing his insights. Olsen's latest book, Knowing, is a compilation of his earlier books, yet with even deeper insights and extended chapters. Knowing can be found on Amazon in all formats. Jeff continues his work as a creative director and participates on several advisory boards for causes he feels serve the higher good of humanity. Olsen's personal platform, Awaken to Oneness, includes personal one-on-one mentoring and group gatherings both physically and virtually around the world. Among all of Jeff's accomplishments, he is most proud of and most fulfilled by simply being a husband, father, and friend. So if you'd like to learn more about him, www.envoypublishing.com, and I'll put that into the chat box. And I will also let more people in. And without further ado, please welcome Jeffery Olsen.
Gosh, thank you, Elizabeth. That's such a it's such a glorious introduction, and yet I feel like I'm among friends. I really do. Elizabeth and I met a couple of years ago, and we live near each other. We're in Estancia when we're in Arizona, and she's in Cave Creek, which is only about 20 minutes apart. So we like to go over and spend time with her family, and yet I've been in Utah for the most part during this whole COVID-19 pandemic, and have been going back and forth far less than I usually do. But it's an honor to be with everyone. And I realize that everyone here is in different stages of their grief process. And I hate when people say grief process, because there's no process to grief. You know, you're in it wherever you're in it, and I want everyone to understand that I am 23 years after the fact, and I'm actually quite proud of myself to be able to talk about this, because for nearly a decade I couldn't even speak of the passing of my son, the passing of my wife, and certainly I couldn't speak of the things that had happened to me except in very, very private settings. And I don't know what it's like for any of you. It took a long time before I could even say their names without crying, without without just blubbering. And so grief looks different for everyone. And yet the beautiful part about helping parents heal is it really isn't a grief organization. It's a joyous organization. It's an organization of joy and connection and healing and finding our way through the grief or finding our way through the process when we have a child who passes away. And I won't pretend to know how any of you feel or what you're going through. I only know how it was and is for me. And for me, having a child pass was one of the deepest wounds I'll ever know. It was the deepest pain that I've ever experienced in my existence thus far. And yet I've learned more through that than I believe anything else I've experienced. And now when I tear up, and I might, because I still tear up when I talk about it, I'll tell you this. For me, I've never gotten over it. I have gotten used to it, and I've come to a place where I can see the blessings from it, and I can boldly say I have learned things I would have learned no other way. But gosh, I still miss them, and yet they're never that far away. That's what I've come to know, is they're right here with us, whether we feel that or not. And often, I call it the whisper. There's something on any given Tuesday, you're in the car and a song comes on the radio, and all of a sudden it hits you, and you think, oh gosh, there's a message in that. Or it might just be those tears and you remember, or you might just have a thought, or you might have a dream, or we may get into this tonight, you might not have anything at all. I had profound experiences around my accident and around the passing of my wife and child, and my surviving son, who was only 7 years old at the time. He never had anything happen. And, he came to me in his young adult life. He was probably 19 or 20. And by that time I had told him what had happened to me, and I'll get into that in a little bit here. But, he said, Dad, you've had dreams, you've had feelings, you've had this visit to the other realm, which we'll talk about later tonight. And he said, I got nothing. I was a little boy. I prayed every day. We were a family that prayed. And he said, I've beaten my knuckles bloody on that door called God, asking just to feel Mom again one day, just for a minute. And he said, I never got anything. And he said, either you're deceived in some crazy way and you think this happened, or you're making it all up. Because he said, if there's another realm or a greater power, it certainly doesn't care about me. Because I asked every day and every night just to have something to let me know that Mom and my little brother were okay, and I could feel them in some way. The reason I share that up front is I will never judge anyone's experience. Whether you have connections, whether you want connections, whether you don't want a connection with the other side, or whether you seek it and don't find it or haven't found it yet. Because I had an interesting experience that night after I had the conversation with my son. And it cut me to the core. In fact, I still say prayers, I suppose. I don't talk much anymore. Now I just listen. But on this occasion I did, and I poured my soul out to what I call God and said, well, gosh, I'll give away everything I experienced. I'll give it all away. If you'll just give my son something to hold on to, something, some glimmer of light hope or anything. And I don't I don't profess to talk to God every day, but I got a profound answer on this particular night. And what was communicated to me is God said, "Why are you judging your son? Judge not that you be not judged." Why are you judging your son's experience? Why are you willing to give yours away, thinking yours is better or yours is different in some positive way than his? Your son's having the perfect experience for his soul's expansion. You're having the perfect experience for your soul's expansion. And to compare the two, or to think you could give yours away to make his better, is not unconditional love at all. And that is your job, Dad, is to love him unconditionally. Now, at the time, he was in a rock and roll band, and the band was breaking up, and some of the band members were going to jail, and drugs were involved. And I was thinking, gosh, but my son could go to jail. And the answer I got is perfect. That's his experience. Don't judge it. Your job is to love him unconditionally. And stepping into that is where I learned not to judge anyone's experience through this process. So I'm not going to ask. Often I will ask, how long it's been, or how many of you have recently had a child pass, or I'm assuming everyone here has had a child pass. And that's what I love about this group, is we can sit and look each other in the eye, even if it's on a Zoom call. And somehow there's a knowing, there's a kinship, there's a brotherhood or a sisterhood of saying, wow, I've walked that path myself. So let me dive into more of the story and the details when I say I had profound experiences. And many of you may have heard this story before, and I'm going to share it again. If you haven't, I'm just sharing my screen there. You can find it in my personal memoir of Knowing. It's on Amazon in ebook format and paperback and hardback, and however you want to consume the story. And I invite you to consume it. This is a very personal memoir where I go pretty deep and open up and share all. And yes, it includes my profound experiences, but it also includes the everyday, ordinary things that to me now have become the most extraordinary things that I know. 23 years ago, and it was actually this time of year, was the Monday after Easter. The whole family was in the car, and we had a horrible automobile accident. We had been visiting my wife's family, and we'd had a great visit. And it was me, my wife, and our two sons. My oldest was 7. My youngest was just 14 months, just a toddler. And we said our goodbyes that Monday morning after celebrating Easter Sunday with the family. And I buckled the kids up in the car and put them in their car seats. And Tamara, my wife, had gotten everything ready, and we were in the car ready to go. We had hugged everybody and said goodbye. And I share this for a specific reason. There was her mom and dad on the porch. And, they were there waving as grandma and grandpa do as we're in the car and we're getting ready to go. And I was just pulling the car into drive. And Tamara stopped me and she said, "Wait just a minute." And I looked at her kind of funny, and she said, "I want to go say goodbye to Mom and Dad just one more time." Now, in that moment, what I thought was, women, gosh, we've said goodbye, we've hugged, I've got the kids in the car, we're ready to go. But I put the car in park, and she jumped out and she ran up to the porch. And I watched as she not only hugged her mom and dad, but she kissed them each. And that's something I'll never forget. When she came running back to the car and happily got in and buckled up, and we got ready to go. But as the day would play out, that truly was the last goodbye, as it were, in this realm. But I bring it up for this specific reason. Again, I call it the whisper. It's that little intuition. It's that little knowing. It's that little thought. I'm just going to go say goodbye to mom and dad one more time. Tamara had no idea what was going to happen that day. I had no idea what was going to happen that day. But I got onto the interstate. I cranked the car up to 75. I set the cruise control. And that was as fast as I could legally go. I was in a hurry. I wanted to get back for work. It was about a 5-hour drive ahead of us. I was already missing half the day and was going to try to catch up into the night. And you know how life goes. It's that chitter chatter, busy craziness that has become our way of being in the United States. Not to digress, but you think about this pandemic and what's been going on. And if there's one benefit, and there may be many benefits, maybe we've learned to slow down a little bit. Maybe we've learned to be still and to maybe think and spend time together and listen a little deeper and grow and learn and live differently. Now, when you're in grief, I think the quietness can be overwhelming. It was for me. Sometimes it would come in waves. And the grief that happened from what was about to go on that day lasted for at least a decade. But as I rolled up, the road at 75 miles an hour and was driving and checking traffic and looking, there was another moment I'll never forget. And I was just glancing in the rearview mirror to see where traffic was. Just when you're driving, it's a moment. It's an absolute moment. I was just glancing. And I found that life is just a series of moments, one moment to the next moment to the next moment. And in fact, when I was dealing with the grief, sometimes I would just have to get to the next moment, just that next breath. That's as far as I could think in the future because everything seems so dismal, so dark, so heavy. So I felt like I was in panic mode sometimes, even if I was just laying in the hospital. But as I looked in the rearview mirror that day, just to check traffic, what caught my eye was Griffin, my little son, my toddler, and he was in his car seat. And I noticed that he had fallen fast asleep. He was sleeping. And Griffin was our miracle boy. We were told we would never have more children. And there was 6 years between he and Spencer. But he had come as a miracle. And when I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him, it's like I just felt that in a very deep way. I'm like, wow, there's our miracle boy. We were never supposed to have him, and look at him. And I noticed the strangest, funniest details in that moment, in that glance, almost like time stood still. I noticed that his fingernails needed trimming. I'm like, gosh, I got to trim that boy's fingernails. And I noticed how long his eyelashes were. And I thought, what a beautiful child. What a beautiful gift. And then I heard Spencer, my 7-year-old, right behind me in the back seat, and he was playing with little action figures he had gotten in his Easter basket and making all the joyful noise of a little boy. And then I just glanced at Tamara, who had also reclined her seat back, and she had fallen sound asleep. But she was still holding on to my hand. And in that moment, I had this profound thought. I thought, gosh, here we are 10 years into a marriage. We've had 2 boys. We're chasing our careers like crazy. And she's still holding my hand. She's still holding my hand the way she did on that first date when I had a couple extra bucks in my pockets as a starving college student. And I took her to a $1 movie. And I had this intense moment of gratitude. Just gratitude. It's like, wow. And that was in a glance in a rearview mirror. I mean, that was it. But My attention then went to the road, and we began racing toward home. And it was about an hour after that that it all came apart. And there was reports of crosswinds, that were over 100 miles an hour. There was reports of a red pickup truck that was driving erratically on the interstate. And this is probably the hardest part of the story for me, and has been to talk about. I believe what happened, however, is that I may have just dozed off at the wheel, just nodded off for a second, just when you just kind of nod. And when I did that, we swerved to the right, and I overcorrected to the left, and the car began to swerve, and I lost control of the car, and the car began to roll, not off the road, but down the road, still at 75 miles an hour on the concrete. And it was a horrific accident. The accident reports say the car rolled 6 to 8 times at least. I blacked out for most of that. But when the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was Spencer, my 7-year-old, crying hysterically in the back seat. And as a dad, I thought, gosh, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized I couldn't move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was the rancid smell of gasoline, the broken glass everywhere. And I had no idea of my injuries at that time. What had actually happened was both of my legs had been crushed and shattered. My left leg was amputated above the knee. My back had been broken. My rib cage had been damaged and my lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off, and then the seatbelt had cut through my abdomen and ruptured all my intestines. I had no idea. I just knew that my son was crying. I wanted to get to him. But that's when I realized that no one else was crying. And that's when I knew that Tamara and Griffin were gone. Now, I sometimes share details. I feel compelled tonight to share details. I couldn't speak of this for years. The first thing I realized was that Griffin's little car seat had broken apart, and he had been ejected from the car. And I mean, everything I am was just crying, where's my little boy? And it's almost like Spirit spoke and said, he's gone, he's gone, he's gone. And that's when I realized that Tamara, who was right near me, because she had reclined her seat, the seatbelt had not restrained her properly. And she had suffered some severe head trauma, which took her life immediately. They both were killed instantly at the scene of the accident. And I knew that. I was aware of that. It's the worst hell a man could ever be in. I mean, here I was trapped, pinned. I couldn't move. I knew half the family was gone. I had a hysterical 7-year-old in the back seat. And I was driving the car. The guilt, the longing, just can't I take those 3 seconds back? What happened? How did this, I wanted to turn back, the Control Z thing on your car. I use an Apple computer. I just wanted to undo. And yet there I was. And I shared those details not to be morbid or graphic, but it's very significant because it was in that darkest moment, that hell, that suddenly things became calm, and I literally felt light come. It's like light came to me. I felt light wrapping around me. It's like this bubble of light came and wrapped around me like a blanket and began to comfort me in the most traumatic nightmare I would ever know. And suddenly I could breathe. And suddenly I didn't feel the pain anymore. I thought, what's going on? What's happening? And it felt as if I was rising above the scene of the accident. And I just kept thinking, gosh, how can this be? Am I okay? Am I really okay? Because suddenly I'm okay. And I was coming to terms with that when Tamara, who I knew was deceased at the scene, was there in the light with me, very near me. She came, she was right there by me. And she had some profound things to share. Now, I want to share that detail for a specific reason too, because I have no idea how your children may have passed or what may have happened. And it doesn't matter in some ways. I mean, I don't care if it's a drug overdose or an accident or cancer or suicide or whatever happened. Many could argue that I had a violent death, you know, with the accident and all the trauma that went on. But I shared what I shared because actually the passing was the most peaceful, natural thing there could ever be. It was like walking from one room to the next. I wasn't even aware of my injuries, to be honest. I was aware of what was going on, but I'm not sure there's such a thing as a violent and horrible death. Based on my experience, it was a peaceful, comforting, almost an ascension, if you will. And I bring that up because perhaps that's how it is for everyone. Perhaps no matter what happens, the passing is peaceful and liberating and calm. And yet that's how it was for me. And here's Tamara, my wife, who, and I shared the details about her passing and the head trauma and all, because as she stood by me in this light, she was absolutely gorgeous. She was beautiful and more radiant than she'd ever been. There was no head trauma. There was no, you know, I years ago, and I love the film Sixth Sense, where the little boy sees dead people, but he sees them bearing the injuries or the trauma that took their life, and that was not how this was. Tamara was absolutely radiant. She was perfect. She was gorgeous, and yet she was emphatic with me that I couldn't go with her. She kept saying, "You've got to go back. You can't be here. You can't come." And I learned a lot about choice in that whole scenario, because there I was looking at the woman that I loved more than life. But I knew I had a little 7-year-old boy in the backseat of that car that, based on the cries I heard, he was okay. And I made a choice. And as she beckoned me to go back, I couldn't come. I chose to come back. And in doing so, I didn't even have to figure out how to come back. That's the crazy thing. It was just intention. It was just the pure intention. I'm going back. And I bring that up because we have no idea the power of our thoughts, you know, our intentions. I'm going back. And as I did that, I found myself actually moving about a hospital. And that was strange too. I mean, I have no idea, I have no concept of time in this bubble of light, if you will. I later found out that people had arrived at the scene. One was a doctor. They had to extricate me from the car. Spencer was okay. They got him out of the car, and he basically physically walked away from the accident. He was banged up pretty good, but emotionally, he thought he had lost his whole family. They rushed me to a local hospital, but based on my injuries, I had to be life flighted to a level 1 trauma center, which I was. And I was unaware of any of that. All I knew is I'd crashed the car. I had said the most profound goodbye I would ever say. And I was wandering through a hospital. And I was seeing the doctors, the patients, the nurses, the families of the patients, anything you'd see in a level 1 trauma ER center. But when I say I was seeing them in a much different, profound way. I mean, everyone I saw, I knew them. I knew everything about them. I knew their love, their hate, their motivations, their pain, their joys. I knew them as if they were me. I call it the oneness. I was experiencing this connection, this profound connection with everyone, and in many ways everything. I would feel their life, if you will. There was one particular nurse, and they seemed to be unaware of me. One particular nurse just brushed by, and I felt, and I say moment a lot, but in a moment, I felt her abuse. I felt what had happened to her as a child as if it had happened to me. Physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And I felt it, and I knew it, and I related to it, and there was a connection through it. And yet in the same moment, I saw the magnificence of her soul. You know, gosh, look at the compassion in this person. She's in a trauma center. She's in the hospital, literally working to heal people. And yet she's so wounded and injured herself. You know, that's just one example. Everyone I saw was profound, and there was this absolute love, this unconditional love and honor with everyone. No matter who they were, what they had done, what they hadn't done, there was this profound connection and love. And I mentioned I grew up in a conservative Christian home, and I knew the Bible, and a Bible verse came to me in that moment. It was the famous verse that says, "Inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of them, you've done it unto me," which, you know, Jesus is attributed to having said that. And I used to think it was a nice verse about being nice. But what I realized in this moment was, oh no, that it's so much deeper. What he was relating is, I am the man in prison. I am the beggar on the street that's naked. I am the stranger looking for a place to stay. I was them and they were me, and there was a whole new depth to that whole concept of compassion and oneness. And I finally came upon a man or a body laying on a gurney that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was really strange. And so I stepped a little closer and looked, and that's when I realized that I was looking at me, or that was my body. I was having this incredibly profound connected experience, but there was my body. There was the skin suit, if you will, that I had been having this earth experience in, and it was an absolute mess. And that was the first time I was aware of the injuries, was actually standing outside of my body, looking at the body and saying, oh my gosh, wow. And I want to talk about that a little bit too, because I suddenly saw my body as so broken, but I also had the pure realization of what a miracle my body was, and all of our bodies are. I mean, suddenly I realized, gosh, I never had to tell my eyes how to be eyes. I never had to tell my hands how to be hands. I had been a Division I athlete. I didn't have to tell my feet how to run. They just knew there was intelligence in every single cell of my body. And yet there I was looking at it so broken and so devastated. And there was a profound sadness about that. And I knew I had to get back in, got to get back in this body. And again, it was just the intention, the thought, got to get back in. And I, with that thought, boom, I was back in the body, but then back to the grief and the pain and the guilt and the trauma and the horror that would become the next years, if you will. In the hospital, I was ventilated. I had a big, I had a big tube down my throat to do the breathing for my collapsed lungs. My legs were obviously immobile because they had been crushed and the one amputated. It was eventually amputated. It wasn't amputated at that point, but they were in bad shape, my legs. My right arm was immobile. They eventually tied down my left arm because I kept grabbing at all the medical equipment. So I was literally like immobile in the bed, machine doing the breathing for me. And I actually spent almost 6 months in the hospital. There was 18 surgeries in total putting me back together. But I had a whole new sense of what it meant to be still because I had no choice. And I learned a lot. We'll get into maybe more of that when we get into questions, but I learned a lot in the hospital. And it's almost as if I had one foot in this realm and one foot in the next. Tamara was very, very near me. Although she had sent me back into this realm, I often felt her. I often had communications with her. In fact, many of you may have met Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll. He was my level 1 trauma doc. And he and one of the trauma nurses, as they worked on my broken body to save my life, actually experienced and saw my wife, Tamara. Her spirit was in the ER room standing above my body as they worked on my body. And this Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll and one of the nurses saw her and later on shared this with me. And Tamara was communicating to them how grateful she was for what they were doing to save my life because she knew I was to raise our surviving son. And so Tamara was very close in the hospital. The pain about Griffin is he wasn't. I was haunted for those weeks and months knowing he had been ejected from the car and thinking, where's my little boy? What happened? What happened? And it was at the end of my hospital stay that there was finally some resolution. And it was after I had gotten out of ICU, I was out of surgical recovery, I was out of regular hospital care. I was actually in the rehabilitation wing. They were trying to teach me how to dress with one arm and one leg. And I had both my arms, but my right one was all in a sling because the shoulder had been torn out so badly. They had to completely repair the rotator cuff and they were doing shock therapy, trying to get the nerves to regenerate into the muscles. But I was in the rehabilitation wing, and it was months after the accident, but it was only weeks before I would go home. And I remember going to sleep one night. And when I say going to sleep, they had finally stabilized my abdominal injuries, which they'd had to leave open. I had horrific infections and everything else. But they had finally stabilized those so that I was well enough to lay on my side. And I remember laying on my side. My younger brother was there. He was teasing me because I'd laid on my back so long. I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. And he was teasing me about being bald. And I rolled on my side, and I remember falling asleep and thinking, wow, I'm sleeping. I don't know if I had slept all those months. And as I slept, I fell into this peaceful, deep sleep. And yet suddenly I felt that light again, the light that I felt at the accident that came and surrounded me. It was that same bubble of light, like a blanket that just came and comforted me. And I felt as if I was rising above the hospital bed. Except this time the light kind of dispensed. It kind of disappeared. It went away. And I was in the most beautiful place. And I've heard people say things like heaven, or the spirit world, or the other side, or the other realm. The only word I can even put on it that comes close is I was home. I mean, I was home. It felt so welcoming. I was home, and I actually began to run. I was just giddy, happy. I was running, and I knew in this realm I wouldn't be running on one broken leg, you know. But in that realm, I was running, and I can't emphasize how physical it was, how joyful it was. I mean, I could feel the ground under my feet in a very physical way. I could feel the energy charging up through my calves and thighs, and I was joyfully running, thinking, I'm home, I'm home. And that's when the knowing came that I wasn't there to stay. I thought, oh, I'm not here to stay. And at that same time, there was this corridor off to my left, and I knew I had to go down that corridor, which I did. I began making my way down the corridor, just intuitively knowing this is the way I'm to go. And as I made my way down it, at the end of the corridor was a crib. And Griffin had still been sleeping in a crib at only 14 months old. And I raced to the crib, and when I looked in it, there was my little boy. There was my little boy sleeping as beautifully and as peacefully as when I'd glanced in that rearview mirror. And I swept him up. I picked him up. You know, as a father, it's like, oh, there's my boy. And I can't emphasize how physical that was too. Have you ever picked up a sleeping child? You know, the weight of them and the heat of them. And it was all so sensory. And I held him, and he was solid against me. And in fact, I felt his ribs expanding with air. I felt him breathing, and I felt his warm breath on my neck. And I don't know if I did this intuitively or if I just wanted to prove it was really him, but I leaned over and I smelled his hair. I don't know why that's so tender to me, but I smelled his hair and I thought, it's him. This is my little boy. And I began to weep, just thinking, gosh, he's really here, and I'm holding him, and this is so real. In fact, that is what was real. This is the crazy, stupid dream, is this realm. That realm was real. And I held him and I began weeping. And as I did, I felt this incredible presence come up behind me. It was an overwhelming presence, this gosh, powerful, cosmic, wise. And I began to become fearful because I'd grown up believing that God was going to judge me and that I was probably in trouble. And I felt like I was in the presence of God. In fact, I knew I was. And I had this guilt bubble up because I thought, my little boy died because I crashed the car. My little boy's here. His life was cut short because I lost control of the car, and I had this horrible feeling, and my thought was, I hope I can somehow be forgiven. That was my thought as I held him. Is there any way I could ever be forgiven? And as I said that, this presence came so close, and it almost felt physical as well. And suddenly I felt these divine arms wrap around both of us and just hold us. And the message was, there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in perfect divine order. And then it's like the lid came off. When I say the lid came off, it was like a fire hose in my consciousness. It was just this flood of truth and beauty and knowledge and understanding. I saw my life. I suppose those who talk of the near-death experience, this was my life review. I saw my parents get divorced. I saw the insecurities that caused in me. I saw the bandages that I put on the insecurities, which for me was overachieving, you know, make the team, get the grade, get the girl, blah, 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 all these things to cover up my not enoughness feeling. I saw my brothers. I saw what they meant and how they had stuck by me even through this horrible accident. I saw Tamara, I saw Griffin, and yet I was seeing it all as a perfect gift. I was seeing my life outlined like the perfect course for my soul's expansion. There was no judgment. In fact, I was having some judgment. I would look at things in my life and say, oh, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. Or, oh, that, I knew that was wrong, but I did it anyway. And, you know, this fear, and yet this beloved divine being was communicating me, that's your judgment of it, not ours. We absolutely love you. You are as precious to us as the little boy you hold. And I, although it was very personal, I knew that if I was that precious and beloved, that we all are, every one of us, that our lives were in order. And as I looked at my life, having believed that life was a test, I realized life was an absolute gift. And it was also communicated that I had orchestrated it, that nobody had made me do this or sent me anywhere, or God hadn't done it to me. I had created my life and experienced my life, and everybody in my life, including Tamara and Griffin, loved me so much that they could play out my soul's experience for the expansion of who I truly was. And it was incredible. There aren't words to explain it. But it was this profound divine acceptance of all of it. And I also learned about choice again. And I don't know what words you want to use: the creator, the universe, God. This divine being told me I had a choice, that I could be angry at God and believe that he tore my family away from me and caused this or allowed it to happen, and that was okay. Or I could be angry with myself. I could beat myself up for the rest of my life because I was driving the car. Or I was given a third choice, and I was told, you can let go. You can give me your son and exercise your will. You can exercise your freedom to let go, to give him back, and Tamara too, if you choose. And therefore you're taking part and having your will exercised in the whole scenario. And in all that love and peace and beauty, I kissed my little boy and I gave him back. I handed him over. And then I woke up, back to the hospital and the injuries and the amputation and the wheelchair and all that stuff. And there were many, many, many days that I thought, why didn't I just hold on? Why did I give him back? Maybe if I'd have just held on, I wouldn't have been booted back here. Maybe I could have just stayed, or maybe he'd be with me, or anyway. But even with those thoughts, there was a different perspective, that everything was a choice, and that I did have the opportunity to let go, and I could let go in peace and love and gratitude, being thankful for the time I had instead of lamenting the time I'd lost. And so many beautiful things have happened, and yet it was hard. I grieved bitterly. I was able to return home, and I'll tell that story really shortly. We're gonna go till about 6 o'clock your time. Then we're gonna open it up for questions, and I'm happy to stay for questions as long as you'd like. But I'll tell you, going home was hard. I worried about Spencer, my 7-year-old. He had come to see me in the hospital on a few occasions, but I knew in going home that he, I had one leg, my remaining leg was in a brace stuck straight out. My right arm was in a brace up here, and I was driving an electric wheelchair with the one good hand I had. And that's how I returned, not to my home, but to my brother's home where my son had been staying, where I would continue to have home health and doctors and nurses and then physical therapy for many more months. But as I returned home, and my brothers were there, they came to get me, and they had to literally lift me into the wheelchair, because with one arm and no legs operating, I couldn't really transfer into the wheelchair. And they got me there, and they were lifting me out of the car to put me in the wheelchair, and I could see Spencer looking out the front window and watching, and I thought, how's he going to accept this? I was the rough and tumble dad, that could run and throw him in the air and play, and now I was going to be broken for the rest of my life, basically. And I just worried, how is he going to accept me? And I saw him watching his uncles, my brothers, lift me into the wheelchair, and I began to make my way to the house, and he came running out, but he ran towards me and ran right past me. He went right past me, and I thought, oh, I knew this was going to be so hard. And I started to work my way to the ramp, and my brothers had built a nice ramp so I could get into the house. And when I turned, to navigate the wheelchair up the ramp, I looked over my shoulder just to see where he had gone. And he'd actually run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors. And he was saying, "Hey, come out, come out, come out. My dad made it home. My dad has made it home." And I started bawling. It was just beautiful. And then he did run and throw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I had all the sutures down my belly from the abdominal, injuries. And they had put a colostomy bag and all the stuff I had to deal with because of my insides being so badly damaged. But I tell this story for a specific reason, because there I was holding my surviving son in a wheelchair. And I asked him, I said, "Are you going to be okay with this? I mean, I'm going to be like this for a while." And he was a Star Wars nut. And so I said, "They're going to fix me up with a cool Darth Vader leg and they'll teach me how to walk again." But I said, "It's going to be a while. And are you going to be able to handle this and be my helper?" And he threw his arms around my neck and he said, "Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you." And we laugh about that. I was with him last Sunday. He just bought a house. He's married now, and we still laugh about that. But I share this for this reason. Suddenly in that moment, in a wheelchair, holding my surviving son in this realm, was no less divine than holding my son who had passed in the other realm. I mean, heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. It was simply to be in that perfect moment and honor it. And that was one of the beautiful things that happened. It's the little things that are big things. There was so many angels. I eventually fell in love again. And Elizabeth knows my dear Tanya. That's my current wife, and she's the hero of the story. I mean, she came into our lives and was willing to not only be my wife, but be Spencer's mom. And we adopted 2 more sons, and I don't call them, they're just my boys. I don't call them adopted. They just came to our family a different way. And the pieces begin to come back together. I mean, it's a beautiful story, but I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It's not like, oh, I had this accident and then had some profound experiences and I was okay and lived happily ever after. That's not the case. And that's all in the book. It was a struggle. I grieved. It was hard. Tanya is the hero because she had to put up with me while I worked through it all. And beautiful things happened. This is the last story I'll tell, and then we'll go to questions. I mean, years after the accident, and by this time I had spoken about my near-death experience. I had written my first book, but it's funny because the local high school reached out and wondered if I would come and speak at their convocation ceremonies. They wanted me to come speak to the graduates at Bountiful High School, and I was flattered and honored. And by that time I was speaking a lot of different places, but they wanted me to come speak about motivation and about tenacity and about, dealing with hardship with courage and things like that. And the crazy thing about it, and I'm ashamed to admit this, is I accepted the appointment. I prepared a speech to go talk about, taking on life with courage. And I got to the high school there and I was waiting before it started. I got there a little bit early, and I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. But as I sat there waiting to go speak to these graduates, and this is what I'm ashamed to admit, it occurred to me that Griffin would have been 18 years old. And that would have been his graduating class. That was our local high school. I realized, oh my gosh, this would have been his class. This would have been his buddies and his teammates and his girlfriends. And there I was, and I began to fall apart again. Backstage, I'm just blubbering, years after the fact, thinking this is my boy's graduation. And I'll say this, he was right there with me. suddenly I felt his presence so close. And he said, "That's right, Dad. These would have been my teammates and my girlfriends, and they would have gotten me in trouble and broken my heart, and we'd had so much fun and probably would have made you greater than you are, had I been here." But he wanted to share that with me. It's like he's still there. He was still there with me. And I don't know how I managed to do it. Oddly enough, the speech was far different than courage in hardship in life. I walked on the stage and looked into the eyes of all those young high school graduates. And I don't know how I managed with the tears, but I told them, "You would have been my son's girlfriends and his teammates and his buddies." And I shared with them what an honor it was to be with them, knowing that my little boy was with them too, and that no one ever dies. We say they passed, but I'll promise you they simply step into another realm and they become our guardian angels. You may not feel that at this point. You may not know that for years. You may not have a profound experience, but you may also have dreams and visions and whispers and feelings and think, wow, they haven't died. They're alive and well. They're in a different realm. And Elizabeth and I talk about this a lot. And I have many friends that are in this group, and I love them all dearly. I love you all dearly, because we're all a group. We're all family in this. And I know that our children are on the other realm, probably laughing at us and probably saying, wow, we broke their hearts in a way they'd never imagined, that their souls would expand and grow in ways that only the universe could even comprehend. And I'm going to go to questions. I've talked too much. I would love to answer questions. I would love to spend time with you. We are coming up on 6 p.m. Pacific time. But gosh, thank you for listening and being so attentive. And you can ask me anything. I'll give you a response. There's nothing off limits. I have no secrets. I'm an open book. And I'll address anything. I'll tell you this, I won't have your answers. You will find your own answers, but I'm happy to give you a response and give you my answers. And if that assists you, then I'm grateful.
Jeff, I just have to say that there have been so many people talking about how moving your story is. I must say, I listen to stories all the time, and I usually am really good about not tearing up, but every time I hear your story, makes me tear up, and it is just so beautiful. And you're such a good friend, and I want to let everyone on here know as well that Jeffrey was very kind to participate in the film Life to Afterlife, Mom, Can You Hear Me? And in case you've seen that, you might have seen him on there as well. And I've had a lot of parents ask about that as well, because they hear about this experience on that film, and it's kind of a shortened version, and they're all fascinated to know how he's doing and what he's doing. And for you, one of the questions tonight from Patty was asking how you are physically now, and I guess we could start out with that in terms of your injuries. If you've healed.
You know what? Physically, I'm an absolute wreck. I mean, I've shrunk an inch where I broke my back. My spine is collapsing. It's developed cysts. It's putting pressure on my sciatic nerve. Pain has become a dear friend of mine. I have phantom pains still in the amputated leg. My right shoulder, I only have about 70% usage of it. But if you ask me how I'm doing physically, I'm absolutely amazing. I'm a walking miracle. I mean, I walk, I work. I was with Spencer, my oldest son, last Saturday and Sunday, tilling up the backyard and planting a vegetable garden and putting up a fence. And I am able to function in a way that just causes me gratitude with every step I take. And I feel good. My lungs have healed. The colostomy was taken down years ago, and my insides are healthy. And I'm becoming an old man, but I am the luckiest old man there is based on my healing. I'm doing very well physically, actually.
Well, I can say that he looks fabulous. One of the things that Jeff did before was you were a rodeo rider as well.
I was, yeah.
Correct?
I did every stupid thing you could do. I rode rodeo, I played football, and I never got injured. And then I got old and wise and wrecked the car and banged myself up forevermore. So.
Well, and that might have something to do with the spinal problems that you're having now too, but who knows? But in any case, another thing that people are asking is if you get signs from Griffin and Tamara, do you get those now? Is that something?
I do, and the signs are interesting. I had a profound dream about Griffin just before I released my book, actually. And when I say dream, I got to tell you, I don't think dream's the right word. I think it was a vision, because I'm not even sure if I was asleep, to be honest. It was that lucid time when you're awake but not up. Does that make sense? But I had this incredible memory. I was in this experience. I was sitting in the front seat of my dad's old pickup truck. And I grew up on a farm, so we had an old pickup truck. And I was sitting on the front seat, and I thought, gosh, I remember this truck. I remember the smell of hay and Copenhagen chewing tobacco. And I thought, I remember this truck like this was yesterday. I remember this. And I looked down in this vision, and I was wearing a red corduroy jumpsuit, the kind that snap on the inner thighs, like a toddler would wear. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hated this jumpsuit. And I looked at my feet, and I had the little white toddler shoes on, and I thought I hated those shoes. I hated, but I was remembering it. It was a very vivid memory. And then the truck started to sway because there was cattle all around it, and there was feed in the back, and the cows were all eating the feed out of the truck. And I thought, I remember this. I was scared. I was frightened. I thought the cows might tip over the truck, and then they'll eat me. And I was having this vivid recollection. And as I looked, I saw my own father, and he shooed the cows away and jumped up in the truck and picked me up. And I thought, gosh, I remember this. I remember this day. I couldn't have been any more than 14 months old. That was my thought. I'm 14 months old. And then it hit me, Griffin. That was his age when he passed. And at that point, the red jumpsuit and the shoes and the truck, everything went away. And suddenly I was standing in that beautiful pasture that was my home. And I was my age, and I was not, I was standing in the field, and I looked over, and there was this beautiful young man. And I knew in a glance, that's Griffin. That's Griffin. I didn't even have to think about it. I knew that's him. And I tried to rush to him, but I couldn't move. I was suspended in this field, but there he was. And then he looked at me, and this nonverbal communication took place. And he looked me in the eye, and what he communicated was so powerful. He communicated, Dad, I wanted you to remember this. And I'm like, yeah, I do remember it. I wanted you to remember it so that you would know I'll never forget being your little boy. And I'll never forget what it was like to have you as my dad. And at that point, wild horses couldn't have held me back. I raced to him. And once again, it was so physical. I just embraced that kid, and yet here he was, a hunk of a man. He was taller than me. I bet he was 6'2" and probably went 225. He was just a chunky, hefty kid, and I hugged him, and I felt him as solid against me as if it was real. And like I say, I think that is real. And then he leaned into me, and then he did speak, and he leaned into my ear. And he said, Dad, I have a message for you. And I thought, wow, a message from my boy from the other side, you know. And I've teased about this and said, I wish he'd have said buy Apple stock or something like that, you know, but he leaned in my ear and I thought, gosh, what could the message be from those other realms? And as simple as it is, he said, Dad, I love you and I'm proud of you. And then I thought, how much more profound could that possibly be? You know, he's aware, he's been watching, he's been looking over me, he's my guardian angel. And he's proud of me, even in all my follies. You know, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that I should be proud of everything I've ever done. There's many things I'm not proud of. But he was proud of me and he loved me in that same unconditional love that I'd felt in those other realms. And, you know, then it all kind of disappeared and there I was, you know, laying on the bed. But yeah, they do come to me. That's very profound. Other times it's a simple whisper. I remember one time being so lonely for Tamara. And I was sitting out in the trees and I was fighting back the tears. I didn't want to cry again. I thought, I cry too much. I can't even tell the story now and I still cry. I'm like, I don't want to cry anymore. And I was sitting in these trees, but I was so lonely for her, so lonely. I hadn't had a dream or a feeling in a very, very long time. And I kept thinking, why can't she just come to me like in the hospital when she felt so close? Or, you know, why does it feel so distant? And as I was having that thought, there was this breeze that kicked up. And I was by a bunch of aspen trees, and you know, they had the leaves that kind of flutter. And that breeze kicked up, and I just listened to those leaves flutter. And this was a simple little thought or a feeling. But as I heard that, what my thought was is, that's me. And every time you hear those leaves flutter or have a breeze kick up, that's just me telling you I'm thinking of you and that I love you, you know. And I kept thinking, is that my imagination? But I'll tell you, every time I hear the leaves flutter or the breeze comes up, and even my current wife, Tanya, knows this, she'll say, oh, Tamara's saying hello. And here again, Tanya is such a hero that way. She's never been jealous or upset. In fact, when we were just friends and Tamara had never met her, I had never met her. She came into my life after the accident. And our friendship, I would, you know, I mean, early on, I would just tell her about how heartbroken I was and how I could never love again and how, you know, life would never be the same. And when things became romantic between us, I'm like, how are you going to deal with that? I've told you everything. It's like you know, how are you going to deal with that? And she laughed. She said, Jeff, that's half the attraction. Knowing you can love at that level. She said, I don't have to, you know, I don't have to fall in love with a one-legged guy who has a son. I've got other options. But she said, knowing that you can love at that level is half the draw. So even my wife, Tanya, has felt Tamara and Griffin's influence in her life, whether it was raising the boys or in us coming together. They visit and give signs all the time, sometimes big and sometimes very small, subtle little whispers. Griffin likes to leave feathers, by the way. Griffin leaves me feathers. I'll find feathers in the car. I'm like, how did a feather get in the car? You know, he leaves me feathers from time to time.
Well, Badisha is saying, wow, this is amazing to hear. I know I want this bond with my baby forever. So it's really nice to be able to hear that you have these experiences still, both with Tamara and with Griffin. Jess is saying, Jeff, can you please share one or two things that have been most helpful to you in your healing from your grief?
That's so, what a great question. And we started on that note, healing. I mean, gosh, who knows what will ever bring peace, but it will come. I promise that. For me, and I don't want this to sound cliche, but on my worst days, I think what was the best tool was for me to go do something for somebody else, just to somehow get out of my pain and go do something for someone else, even if it was a phone call or a card or a note or a visit. Or in my worst pain, I didn't want to have any attachment to any of it. And I would go downtown where there was a lot of homeless people and just, bring them a sandwich or give them a hug. I mean, we can't even do that now in this pandemic. I think this separation, I can't wait to embrace somebody again. And even if it's a stranger, but yeah, doing something for someone else seemed to rescue me from my darkest days and just take the focus off of my pain in a way to get me through that afternoon or that night or that morning. You guys all look so good. I'm just sitting here.
My internet
This
seems
is
to
kind of
be a
fun.
little bit slow.
I'm looking at all the faces of all the people.
Well, they're all, oh, my internet is unstable. Can you hear me? I'm so
Yes.
sorry. I want to say that Susan is saying, "You're amazing, Jeffrey. You've been through so much. About a month before my 20-year-old son passed in January, we were in the car and he said to me, 'Mom, I believe there are other dimensions.' Do you think he knew?"
Yes. I think we all know at some level. And whether he knew consciously or subconsciously, I would hesitate to say. Um, this is in my book as well. Everything's in hindsight. You can look at that now and say, wow, did he know? The day we left for our little family vacation, we left on a Thursday night, I think, and spent Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and came back on Monday. The day we left, Tamara had a dream which she thought was a nightmare or something, but she actually shared with me. She said, I dreamed you were marrying somebody else. And I thought I was going to be in trouble all day. I'm like, hey, don't blame your dream on me. I didn't do a thing. And yet she shared with me, these are these strange conversations, just like yours. Mom, I think there's other realms. She said, well, the weird thing is you're marrying somebody else, but in my dream, I was okay. I wasn't angry about it. And I didn't think anything of it until hindsight. And then I asked the same question. Wow, did she know based on how this is all played out? Did she know? Um, I think we all know whether we know that we know. That's a, yeah, we all know. We just don't know that we know.
That's beautifully said. And I know that among all of the parents that I've met, so many of them have told me that their children knew and that they knew too. Bob is asking, when our child dies with horrific trauma, our minds often keep replaying the way they passed. You've been able to smooth the horror. Can you offer how you were able to do this?
Well, I think I had a cheat sheet because I had passed. I had passed in the same accident. And so my cheat sheet was the passing wasn't horrible or traumatic at all. So that, I mean, I still wondered about Griffin being ejected from the car. That's the only way I could relate is I thought, oh God, what happened there? And I did have feelings about that, but having passed myself, and quite honestly, I was the worst injured in the accident. Tamara and Griffin both had head trauma that took their life very quickly. Not to be morbid about that, but having passed myself and being dismembered and all, I think the universe is kind when it comes to that. And I think the passing is peaceful regardless of the circumstances. And I've heard many stories that there's angels around those when they go, and they're sustained as well. So I've found great peace in that, based on my own experience. But that's about the only expertise I have is my own experience.
I think you're very right. I've always heard from every medium, every person who talks about the afterlife, that there's absolutely no pain and that we are greeted by all of those who love us immediately. And there's beautiful light. And it's wonderful to hear that from you because you've been there and come back again. So you can tell us about it. I also have a question here about forgiveness. Does the forgiveness just take time, or was it sudden when you had your head, when you had your profound experience? Was it something that you were able to process over time or quickly?
No, it took a very long time. And the funny thing is I'd already been given the answer. I'd seen the sum, but I didn't understand the equation, if that makes sense. I struggled with guilt for literally a decade, and I didn't write my first book until 12 years after the accident. And the reason is I couldn't write about it or talk about it until I found some peace in my own forgiveness and forgiveness of myself. It took time. It took time, and it took me the ability to choose to forgive myself. So let me articulate this if I can. It took me a long time, but forgiveness can come in the twinkling of an eye when it does. And yet for me, it had to be me letting go and forgiving myself and realizing that this is all in divine order, and there are no mistakes. There are no accidents. There simply is what is, and that has to be a choice to embrace it. But for me, it took some time. It really did.
Thank you, Jeff. And I also have a question from Diana. She's asking, did you experience slow motion or altering time during the accident?
Yes, I did. In fact, just before, and I wrote about this in the book, just before I left my body, everything slowed down. Everything was calm. Everything was slow. Yeah, and I remember the glass, the little crystals of glass, and yeah, I did experience a slow motion or no time. It was interesting.
And all of the other comments are just affirmations that you have just been so instrumental in all of these parents' healing tonight. And I don't know if there are any other questions. And let's see, I guess I'm just looking to read. So Diana is saying that's what she had experienced when she almost died and fell asleep at the wheel as well. So I guess that she was just seeing if this was the same kind of thing. Let's see. Chris has a question as well. So Chris, could you answer it again? Oh, okay, I have it. I'm sorry. Our daughter passed on Easter morning. My wife, sorry, my screen just changed. My wife is wondering if there is a certain way to live or a spiritual level to be obtained before experiencing this sort of visit.
You know, Chris, can I introduce you to the group? I know Chris. He's got his thumb up there if you guys can look at him. He's the handsome guy there with the glasses. And my heart goes out to Chris and his wife. They're fresh in this. I introduced him to this group and asked that he join us tonight. And I ask all of you to reach out, Chris. I know you're in the early stages of this process, and I'm sending blessings and all my love and light to you, my brother. And your wife's question is very sincere. My answer is no. You're perfect just the way you are. I mean, my little son was far more perfect than I ever was. I wasn't living in a spiritual way to have the experience I had. And he certainly was an innocent child and didn't have an experience. As far as I go, it's something about our soul's journey, whether we have this connection or whether we don't, whether we see it in little things or big things. But, this whole thing about not judging, don't judge yourself if you think, well, if only I lived better, I would have a profound dream, or if only I did something better, I would have this connection, or I would feel them nearby. The best advice I can give is to love yourself and realize that it's all in divine order. Nothing went wrong. There are no accidents. There's no mistakes. This is how it is. And I think there's contracts. I think our children who go, and here's where I might get a little philosophical, but I truly embrace this. they loved us enough to go. They loved us enough to leave so that our souls would have the expansion that we came here to get. And they were the only ones that could fulfill that for us. And so we probably hugged in those other realms and said, let's go do this. And you'll break my heart in ways I can't even imagine. And they said, I love you enough to do it. And regardless of the circumstances, that's how I feel, is there's contracts, there's agreements. And I will promise you this, the day will come, whether in this realm or another realm, when we'll fall in each other's arms and we'll laugh and say, wow, look what you taught me. And look what I learned. And look what I've become because you loved me enough to go. Thank you for showing up and keeping your word for me so that I would get what my soul came here to get. And now we can dance into the eternities in absolute peace and joy and beauty. And that doesn't matter. Gosh, I don't mind being honest with this group sometimes. My boys have struggled. I've got teenage boys that really struggle. And I know that's all part of the contract too. You know, they said, I'll come here and teach you things that we agreed upon. And we're all in it together. And it is going to be beautiful someday. I don't mean to, gosh, you guys make me cry. I don't, but you've struck a nerve in me because it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the whole universe and the unconditional love that is our experience here, that we chose and we created, and the whole universe supports it, even those that go, because they're the key catalysts in allowing us to feel at levels we would have never felt at had it not happened.
Jeff, you just are so moving. Everybody is writing so much. I just have to read just a few of these because you can't see them probably. Thank you, Jeff. I love this message on soul contracts. Oh, my heart, that is so beautiful. That's from Jess. We have something from Dolores saying, Jeffrey, your perspective is astounding and profoundly beautiful. Thank you so much. Jess is saying, my son has been my greatest teacher. I love him beyond words. And then Badisha is again writing in, yes, I truly believe that. She started us on our journey to help children through our initiative after birth, and she continues to bless and guide us even now, and will continue to inspire and bless us. She is our guardian angel. Of course, they are. Chris is saying, thank you for your beautiful answer. Maria is saying, so grateful to you, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. My son, my only child, is my teacher. And so, and Bob is saying, Jeff, you offer all of us love and perspective. And I agree with him. And I just want to say to everyone, we have another YouTube video that's available that Jeff has already done with Dr. Jeff, who was in the emergency room with him, who actually continued to be an emergency room doctor for years and years, and finally just broke down and said, I've got to talk about this. I see people in the emergency room and I'm going to tell people about it. And so, and it's a wonderful message that he is giving to people. So that's available as well. Obviously Knowing is his beautiful book. And then I don't know, Jeff, do you have anything coming up that maybe you can tell people about? I know you're going to be speaking for IONS. I'll be speaking for IONS as well for the conference series coming up in May that you're going to be a part of. And
yeah, well, yeah, I'll be doing that in May. Sunday, I've got something coming up on Sunday at noon Mountain Time, which would be 11 o'clock your time. And we're getting together with people from Scotland and Ireland. We're doing a virtual coming together, like a little oneness meeting. And I'm going to put the link here in the. I'll put the link in the chat so that everybody can get to it. Let me do this, but it's free. It's something you can all attend. You just join the Zoom link. I've sent you in the chat a Facebook link, And the Facebook event has the Zoom link and everything in it.
Um,
And then
oh, good.
well, I want you to be able to find me. This little image has my email at the bottom of it.
Okay,
And,
wonderful. So
yeah.
what I'll do is make sure that I put this on the video when I post it. But let's see, Jess was asking about what I was speaking about before I mentioned your book. I think that what I was talking about was the video that I've already posted on YouTube of you and Dr. Jeff speaking. So that's available. But also, if you haven't seen Life to Afterlife, Mom, can you hear me? I just have to tell everyone, you have to watch that, because Jeff is amazing in it. He tells a lot more of his story than he actually said tonight, but in a different way. There are 17 parents from Helping Parents Heal who participated in it, and it's free on Amazon Prime. And then Jeff is typing all of his information in to the sidebar. So I'll be sure to put that onto the video when I upload it to YouTube as well. And I just want to tell everyone, thank you for being here tonight. And thank you, Jeff, for coming to speak again. I am always so honored to have you here. And if anyone would like to get in touch with Jeff, I know that he'll get back to you as well. And he's really good at that. And what I'll do now is go ahead and stop the recording and make sure that everyone can say thank you and goodbye to Jeff. If you guys could maybe unmute your microphones to be able to do so, that would be wonderful. Everyone's writing in the chat box as well. Make sure you're unmuted so that you can.